Hi guys, and welcome back to Elizabeth Ann Reads. I'm Anne, and today we're going to do a tag. We are doing the Reread Book Tag. This was created by Scally Dandling about the books, and I was tagged by Danny over at Spinelli Speaks, so I will be sure to link both their videos below. But if you've been around my channel much, you know that I am an avid rereader. I love to reread my favorite books over and over and over again. And so yeah, this just seemed like a great tag to do. So question 1 says, let's assume you do reread if you're doing this tag. So where do you sit on the scale from almost never to all the time? I would say all the time. I feel like I reread constantly, but as I've kept track in the last couple of years a little more carefully, I don't actually reread quite as much as I thought I did, which is, I think, still far above average. But I think I tend to reread 1 to 2 books a month. So not quite as much as I thought I did, but still I think that's a good number. And question number 2 is, has that changed over your reading life? And no, it hasn't. I have always been a rereader. As a kid, I reread books endlessly. It seems like I mean, we did have a library, obviously. I went to the library, but internet, BookTube, Goodreads, the bookish community online didn't exist. So in a lot of ways, I was limited by what I had, what I knew, what was just kind of put in front of me, and didn't have the resources that we have now. So I read Boxcar Children over and over and over again. I read the Mandy books over and over and over again. A series called Grandma's Attic I read over and over and over again. Beatrix Potter I read over and over again. And all of these books I still occasionally go back and reread. But yeah, the books on my shelves I read countless times. Question 3 is, when do you reread? Immediately after finishing a book, or not until years later, or when the mood strikes? And yeah, it's when the mood strikes. It's usually years later. My favorite books I tend to return to every 2 to 3 years. But then ones that are favorites, but not like my favorite favorites, maybe every 5 to 6 years. It really varies. Occasionally, if I read something new that I really love, I will return to it within a year or two and reread it. I have plans to reread a book or two this December that I have already read earlier this year. So there's a few, it varies, it's when the mood strikes, but I would say for my favorites, every 2 to 3 years. Question 4 is, why do you reread books? Which I think is a great question, because a lot of people don't, and that's fine, to each their own. But a lot of people see it as a waste of time. Not so much a waste of time, but there's so much out there to read. Why would you spend time reading something you've already read? And my question is, if you've already eaten your favorite meal, why would you go eat it again? You already know what it tastes like. Obviously, it's a little different. We need food to live. But things that we love, places we love, we want to return to, right? If you've been on a trip and have gone somewhere you absolutely love, you're not satisfied with that. You want to go back and experience it again. If you've watched a movie you love, you want to experience it again. Let's be real. How many times have you watched all 9 seasons of The Office? Like, true confessions here. But I believe good books can be reread countless times. Because I think there's always more to find. I think your perspective changes as you get older and your life experiences change, and therefore what you take from a book will be different at 40 than it is at 20 or than it was at 12. And so I think there's always different things to find in books. I think you relate to different characters depending on where you are in life. I think there's just so much more to be found in books upon rereading. Question 5 is, how do you reread? Faster or slower, or just the best bits? I am not a just the best bits reader. If I'm going to reread, I'm going to reread the whole thing. And surprisingly, I actually usually reread slower. I would almost think it would be the opposite, but I found that it's not. And I think that's because there's not that tendency to rush through. You don't have that urge you don't need to know what happens. You already know what happens. So you can kind of sit and process things more and dwell on different things. And so, not always, but the majority of the time, I tend to reread slower. I'm also not a super careful reader the first time through a book. For me, the first read through is almost just deciding if it's a book I want to spend more time with or not. So it's almost like I have to read it once to decide if I want to spend time reading it, which sounds really weird. But that's kind of how it is for me. So I don't feel like I really process a book until I've read it at least twice. Question 6 is, who or what do you reread? More specifically, which authors, genres, or individual books? And I don't limit myself. I reread what I want to reread. But there are certain authors that tend to pop up a lot in my rereads. Things like C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, Ellen Montgomery, Jasper Fforde, Connie Willis. Yeah, some of the children's books that I've already mentioned. But it does tend to be a lot of favorite authors that I go back to a lot. Question 7, is there a book that you found better when you reread it? I don't think so. I think books will fluctuate a little bit. Like they might go from a 5-star to a 4-star or 4 to 5. But I can't think of anything that was like a drastic shift from I loved to I hated or vice versa. Generally, if I love a book, I'm still going to love it upon reread. I can think of, like this year, I think of 2 rereads right off the top of my head. One was Momo by Michael Ende, which I really loved the first time I read it. But when I reread it this year, it was phenomenal. It's topping the list right now of my favorite books. So that, even though I loved it the first time, I loved it so much more the second time. I also reread The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, which I loved, but I don't think I liked it quite as much as I did the first time I read it. Still a solid 4-star book. It's not a huge shift, but I think there will be little fluctuations. And I think that's mostly just me, where I am in life and what I need at that point in life. Question 8 was, is there one that was worse when you reread it, which I basically already answered. And then question 9 is, which one book have you reread the most times? This is a horrible question. I have no idea. I mean, if we're going like all the way back to picture books, it's going to be Beatrix Potter. Anything by Beatrix Potter. Probably the one I've read the most is Tale of Two Bad Mice, because that's my favorite. Because it has a dollhouse in it, and the mouse's name is Hunka Munka, which is amazing. So that, if we're going all the way back to picture books, probably Tale of Two Bad Mice would be top of the list. If we're talking more, full-on actual books, I'm probably going to have to say The Chronicles of Narnia, or maybe a tie between The Chronicles of Narnia and The Blue Castle by Ellen Montgomery. Those are both books and series that I return to frequently. Again, probably every couple years. So I would say those would top the list of books most reread. That is it for the questions. I'm not going to tag anyone. I'm not totally sure who has or hasn't done this. But if you are a rereader, I encourage you to do this tag. I'm always curious to have this discussion with people about why you don't reread books. Anyway, that's it for today. Let me know down below what your favorite book to reread is. And thank you for watching.